Hi, everyone. Welcome to Waste 360's Nothing Wasted podcast. On every episode, we invite the most interesting people in waste, recycling, and organics to sit down with us and chat candidly about their thoughts, their work, this unique industry, and so much more. So thanks for listening and enjoy this episode.
Welcome to Implementing a National Vision for Recycling. My name is Ann Germain, and I'll be your moderator. And I'm with the National Waste and Recycling Association. So first, thank you for your support of Waste Expo, and welcome back to in-person events. It's my first time traveling in over a year, and it's great to see everybody live again. Okay, so with that, we're going to get started. We had originally 3 speakers, but unfortunately one of our speakers was not able to attend in person, and since this is implementing a national vision for recycling, we really wanted to make sure to have EPA present. Unfortunately, they were not able to travel for this event. We do have a small pre-recorded section section that they're going to do, and then we're going to conduct the discussion portion of this session without them. So I'm going to go through our 3 speakers real quick. So our EPA panelist who will be pre-recorded is Nina Shah, the Acting Division Director for the Resource Conservation and Sustainability Division of Office of Land and Emergency Management for the US EPA. She has 25 years of environmental law and policy experience and is, as I said, currently the acting director. She holds degrees from Duke University School of Law and the University of Michigan School of Natural Resources and the Environment, and has worked as a corporate environmental attorney, and in her current work has valuable experience from both regulatory and voluntary spheres of EPA. So she'll be going first, and then we'll hear from our next 2 speakers who are on stage, and they'll give a short summary of their vision of national recycling, and then we'll move on to Q&A. Okay, so our next 2 speakers, Michelle Leonard is the Senior Vice President of SCS Engineers and is a national expert on solid waste planning and recycling and sustainability with over 30 years of experience in environmental consulting and project management, and has a particular emphasis on sustainable materials management, including solid waste management, planning, and facilities. And finally, Brent Bell is the Vice President of Recycling for Waste Management. He's worked in the waste industry for over 20 years, beginning at USA Waste, and then worked in the corporate offices when the USA Waste merged with Waste Management. He moved on to recycling a few years later and helped form Recycle America Alliance, and designed to attract regional recycling processors. He's currently the Vice President of Recycling and is responsible for operations at over 100 facilities and sales and marketing of their 13 million tons of recycling and organics. So if anybody needs to buy any, then talk to Brent, because he's got some to sell you. Okay, so with that, let's get started.
Hello, Waste Expo. I'm excited to join you all today virtually to talk about what EPA is doing related to sustainable materials management, and to share a big picture perspective on why I think this is such an exciting time for waste management and recycling. It's amazing. We are at a unique moment where there are so many policy drivers coming into alignment to positively impact our work. Congress, industry, nonprofits, the international community, and the American public all want to see an improved recycling sector. There is state legislative action and congressional action, the likes of which we have not seen in a long time. And all of it is aligning with President Biden's priorities of reducing climate, reducing impacts on communities with environmental justice concerns, providing good jobs, protecting public health, and relying on science. All of this interest has really been building over the last few years. Since 2018, EPA has convened annual summits, bringing together leaders from industry, nonprofits, and all levels of government to discuss opportunities to advance the domestic recycling industry and markets. We have greatly valued this participation and appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all today about where we are. As many of you know, we have been working on a draft national recycling strategy, which we put out in October of 2020 and anticipate releasing the final version this summer of 2021. I am excited to provide you all with an update on the strategy in just a few minutes. In addition to the draft strategy in October of last year, in November of 2020, EPA set a national goal to increase the recycling rate to 50% by 2030, to inspire action and drive participation, innovation, and progress across the entire value chain. The goal will help governments make necessary changes to collection and sorting systems, and we anticipate that it will help inform industry investment decisions. In addition to all of that exciting work in October and November, in December, who knew we were going to get new legislation? The Save Our Seas 2.0 Act was enacted in December of 2020, and it demonstrates bipartisan congressional interest and provides EPA with authority to act on domestic recycling through new grant programs. While we were provided authority to issue grants to fund improvements to local waste systems, we were not given funding for the grants, but that may change in FY 2022. Fortunately, as I mentioned, President Biden's administration recognizes the importance of enhancing the recycling system in the United States. I am thrilled to announce that in the President's budget for fiscal year 2022, EPA is requesting $10 million from Congress to support a solid waste infrastructure for recycling pilot grant program. If Congress provides funding, this pilot grant program will build innovation in the recycling industry while reducing waste, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and creating jobs. As you all know, recycled materials serve as important feedstocks in American manufacturing and further contributes to our economy by creating domestic jobs. In addition to preserving ecosystems and devoting land to more productive uses, recycling creates more jobs than landfilling and incinerating materials. While there are many benefits to recycling, we need to ensure that all communities can reap these benefits. It's important that we not disproportionately impact vulnerable communities. Environmental justice and equity are priorities under President Biden and EPA Administrator Michael Regan. And in that light, EPA is examining how we support an equitable society for all. We recognize that an effective recycling system can help address equity and environmental justice concerns. For instance, while many of the jobs supported by the recycling system are good-paying jobs, they also need to be safe. Recycling is also essential to combating climate change, which is another priority for President Biden and EPA Administrator Regan. Mining natural resources and processing them accounts for about 50% of total global greenhouse gas emissions. Domestic and global resource consumption continues to increase. In fact, global resource consumption has tripled over the last 4 decades. Recycling helps keep materials in use, which decreases habitat destruction and biodiversity loss associated with mining finite resources. The connections between materials usage, the economy, and the environment underscore why sustainable materials management is critical to our nation's health and prosperity. There are several actions we think are needed to really make a difference in managing materials more sustainably and equitably. We need to be more conscious in our consumption and thus promote reduction and material reuse. We need to enhance our recycling system to reduce our collective environmental impact. We need companies and innovators to design out waste and to design products that keep materials in the supply chain as long as possible. We need to implement materials management strategies that are inclusive of communities with environmental justice concerns. We need to pursue innovations that offer the benefits of cleaner and safer processing of materials. We need to grow and support end markets for recycled commodities and harness the purchasing power of the federal government. When governments and organizations purchase materials made from recycled content, we drive demand for recycled materials and we make the system more economically viable. And lastly, we need to continue investment in our recycling and materials management infrastructure. Later this year, EPA will release the methodology for calculating the national recycling rate, along with a recycling measurement guide to help local governments, states, and others standardize their measure the way they measure recycling. Currently, there's a lot of variability in how recycling rates are calculated across the United States. The Recycling Measurement Guide will reflect what material management pathways EPA recommends be included when measuring a recycling rate. The guide will provide a standardized way of calculating a recycling rate to allow states and local governments to track progress against the national recycling goal. And now, finally, an update on the National Recycling Strategy. The strategy outlines the actions needed from across the value chain to help reach the national recycling goal. The strategy reflects this administration's priorities as well as updates based on the 156 public comment letters we received. Implementing the actions in the strategy will contribute to President Biden's commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2030. It is a first step in leading our nation to a more sustainable, thriving economy with a focus on protecting public health for everyone, especially local communities. To have a real impact and make progress on improving recycling, EPA will work with stakeholders from across the value chain to implement actions identified in the strategy. And hopefully this will include many of you. For this strategy to be successful, we need all entities, from the federal, state, and local government to private industry and trade associations, to make commitments and take action. Implementing the actions in the strategy will help create a more viable recycling system, produce more jobs, and reduce the impact on the environment, while also protecting human health. In the coming months, we'll see what happens with the infrastructure bill and the president's budget, but in any case, we know we are driving towards transformative change. It is super exciting, and I look forward to sharing more with you all in the future. Thank you, and I hope to be at Waste Expo in person next year.
Well, that's a hard act to follow, and I think she said it all. We can all just go and have cocktails now. Is that? Thank you, Ann. As Ann said, I am with SCS Engineers, and I manage and run our sustainable materials management practice across the United States. I think that even within my own company, this is kind of a reawakening of environmental protection of the recycling industry. And in fact, SCS Engineers celebrated its 50th anniversary last year. And even a company that old realized, if we're going to stay in this business, we have to do things differently as well. And we realized that the growing part of our solid waste practice is in sustainable materials management. I've been working in this industry for about 30 years, and I've never seen as much movement towards collaboration amongst individuals in our industry to work towards a national recycling policy. Ann and I worked together 20 years ago at SWANA as volunteers to try to enable some national legislation, and it died a quick death. I think now more than ever we have an opportunity to do legislation, do activities more on a national basis, and have some success with it. The public sector, the private sector are really geared up for it. We're finally connecting the dots that in terms of climate change, economic development, and protecting public health and safety. And as we look at the impacts of climate change on our environment, as we look at the impacts of policies like China National Sword, we realize that we have to make a change in what we do here in the United States to keep our economy going, to continue to reduce the environmental impacts of what we consume, what we manufacture, and to continue our economic development. So I look forward to discussing this. We'd really like to make this an interactive, not just us sit up here and talk at you. We'd really like to hear your opinions as well. We're just here to kind of guide the discussion today.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle and Ann. I appreciate that. This is, Michelle's right. Is the questions that come from the audience and what you all want to hear about is what's really important to us. I'm Brent Bell with Waste Management. While we're the largest residential recycler in the country, one of the unique responsibilities that we have is there's so much material that comes in every day that has to have long-term sustainable homes. And so, I always tell the folks that may be new in this industry, is making sure that those outlets for our materials are sustainable is the most important priority. As you've seen recently, you know, we've seen some commodity prices have improved over the last few years compared to, you know, historical averages. That's a good thing for the recycling industry. And one of the first questions that I often get asked is that sustainable? Are those prices here to stay? Is that demand here to stay? And the one thing I can tell you, you know, I've been here since 1997 in this industry, is it seems like there was probably a good decade where people loved to talk about, you know, doing recycling and being green, but as soon as virgin prices changed, then we lost that customer. They switch over to the virgin just because the economics were more favorable. Now what we're seeing, which I truly do think is what's different about today's era than what we have seen in the past, is a lot of these companies have these ESG goals, and they're coming out, you know, if you're not familiar with the kind of the money markets, you know, Larry Fink is the one of the heads of one of the largest funds, BlackRock Investments, and he came out letter to all his folks and companies saying, you will have ESG as part of your company's, you know, standards and practices, and you'll implement those. And he was serious about it. And we're seeing a lot of these companies now that are looking at their packaging that they're using and using recycled content and saying, hey, I need to get the supply of recycled content at any cost. This is what we're doing as a company, not something that, hey, we may, you know, test the waters and switch back and forth. And so when I look at the economics on the recycling today, they're much more favorable because I think we're seeing that committed investment with these companies saying, hey, I'm going to use recycled content, and it doesn't matter what the price of virgin is going to be. That's not an option for my company anymore. So as we're seeing this, we can continue to make these investments that we've been doing in the infrastructure for recycling. You know, Waste Management, we've invested about $100 million a year over the last 4 years. This year is going to be a little bit more than that. We just recently got approved. We got about $150 million we're going to invest in, and we're investing in new facilities that have a lot of really cool technology. One of our facilities that just opened up in Chicago, very highly automated, and is really setting the stage for how these facilities can look in the future. So there's really a lot of exciting stuff going on in the recycling space today. I think that's going to continue as we head into this discussion. I don't think anybody has a clear path that's easy to follow to get to a 50% recycling rate, but I do think that through some of the discussion today, we can get to where there's several options that we all have to take part in to try to achieve that goal and commitment. So thanks, Ann.
Thanks, Brent. Thanks, Michelle. So what we're going to do is I'm going to start the Q&A, and so we're going to try and have it as a discussion. But okay, so to start off the Q&A, obviously we know that EPA has established a 50% recycling goal by 2030, which sounds like a long time away, but it's really right around the corner, and that is quite ambitious given that our recycling rate has been pretty flat for the past few years. And a lot of the reason it's been so flat is that there's been so much lightweighting of packaging, and if that continues, then how are we going to increase this? So I guess my question is, what would be the way that we could achieve 50%? I mean, is packaging enough? Packaging alone enough, or what else do we have to target in order to be able to access or get to 50%?
Do you want to take a stab, or you?
Sure. Well, EPA is going to come out with their methodology of how to, you know, calculate recycling, and then we'll all be in good shape. You know, there's a lot of issues. I mean, we know we've got to reduce the amount of contamination that's coming into our recyclables, and stop counting that. We know we've got to educate people on, you know, not only that this is the right thing to do, but how to do it correctly, and that this is the necessary thing to do. We've got to increase the efficiency of processing the materials, and Brent talked about, you know, the advancements that they've made in their facilities, and we can talk about packaging as well, but just getting the materials separated and sorted into the right place is a huge challenge in and of itself. And then, of course, we've got to have the markets for those materials. And that means increasing the use of post-consumer recycling, and in my opinion, requiring that in the manufacture of new products to stimulate the market for those materials.
And I think I'll just add on is access to recycling, right? To make sure that everyone, you have a starting base. I think right now some of the stats are about 62% of the U.S. population has access to curbside recycling. So that means that you've got 38% that don't have that easy access. And so whether that's multifamily housing, where that is, there's a lot of away from home recycling. Every time I go to it drives me crazy in Texas. You go to the gas station, you look by the gas pump, and it's filled with plastic water bottles, right? There's just a lot of, whether it's sports events, stadiums, even here walking down the strip in Las Vegas, you look at the trash bins and they're filled with all this good plastics. It's really high value now, so it's really disappointing to see that. So making sure people have access to recycling, I think, is important. But it does start with the packaging, is what people put on the shelves, making sure those materials are easy to recycle. The one event that we host a year, it's a zero waste event called the Waste Management Phoenix Open, and the first thing to making a zero waste event is making sure that nothing comes in unless it can be recycled. And so the same thing has to be said for the retail stores and the folks that are purchasing this material. It's got to be easy to be recycled in curbside programs, and then you're going to see an increase in that recycling rate. There's definitely a lot of confusion now on what goes in the bin, what doesn't go in the bin, contamination, and really trying to simplify that with education programs is going to be helpful as well.
So we do have a question, Abby, but I'll ask a second question while you're going over there. So I heard a little mention of creating demand and improving the recycling content. So do you see brands moving in that direction, or do you think it's going to be necessary to implement policy changes in order to get everybody to commit?
Well, I like to start out with incentivizing programs, that carrot versus the stick, and maybe that's just the way I was raised, or maybe that's my beliefs, but incentivizing the use of recycled content, I think, is the way to start that. And
what kind of incentive?
Whether it's a financial incentive by, you can, in bottle bills or other financial mechanisms where you incentivize, you reward the manufacturer for including recycled content in their goods. And then again, that helps to create a market, stimulate the market for that material, and maybe offset some of the conflict that we have between virgin and recycled content materials.
Yeah, I look at it, recycling is such a unique industry. I always tell folks this, where else do you have inbound customers? If you're a Chevrolet making cars, right, and all of a sudden tomorrow no one wanted to buy an automobile from you, you'd stop buying tires and metal and glass and all the parts to make a car, right? Recycling doesn't do that. We take material in every day, even though regardless of what the demand on the outbound market is, right? So we have to have homes for this material every day, or else it just piles up and there's no place to go, or essentially it's not even recyclable, right? So having the demand for it is really where it starts at, and we've got to make sure that those products, those manufacturers, they're using recycled content in that demand. People are walking the talk, so companies, and Waste Management just recently started doing this too, and shame on us for not doing it before, but all of our recycling carts now have post-consumer recycled plastic in it. That didn't happen 2 or 3 years ago, right? All of our uniforms that our drivers are frontline employees. We have 52,000 employees at Waste Management. All the uniforms are going to be made with recycled content now. All the materials that we buy now, we're looking at that as a procurement department saying, don't come to Waste Management and try to sell us a product or something that's going to be packaged in a material that's not made out of recycled content or not recycled friendly. And so I think all these companies, and we went to the EPA, for America's Recycles Day, and we encourage the federal government as being one of the largest, spenders in the United States, is making sure that their suppliers are using recycled content in all the stuff that they buy, whether it's for their military or for their offices.
I was just saying, we've been saying for years, we are the market, and that's what we need to do. In our own personal purchases, in our companies, and in the communities that we live. Absolutely.
So do you have a mic?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I have an unfair question, but the engineer in me, when I hear 50%, if it's car gas mileage standards, they measure that, and you're like, oh, you got to be at 25. So my question when I heard the 50 is, I wonder where we are now. And I know things are measured differently, but if you were going to guess, the EPA probably had an estimate, and I don't expect you to know that, but if you were to guess, we're going to 50% in 9 years. Yeah, where do they think we're at now?
So EPA, I think we're at 32.
Yeah, 32.
32.
32.
And I think we've been 32, 33 for the last 10 years.
Okay, so that was a fair question.
Yeah, it went down a little bit, right?
Thank you.
But again, and part of the problem, as Ann mentioned, is lightweighting of materials that we're collecting. Is that negatively impacting that recycling rate? Because we could collect all those plastic bottles, and they're going to weigh less now. So are we recycling less? And maybe a new methodology to how we count recycling, which I think we've talked about for many, many years as well, will help at least to standardize it. And I think that's, again, one of the ongoing challenges that we all have is, what's in that numerator, what's in that denominator.
Right, I think Brent had in our pre-discussion how many bottles?
I'm full of useless stats, but one of the stats that we calculate as we did see the lightweighting of materials, and we did this with a lot of commodities, but just your bottle here, right, is used to 60,000 bottles made up about a ton of material for us. Now we have to process 100,000 of these same bottles to make this same weight. And so if you look at what that does to your equipment, much more labor you have to add on to get 40,000 more bottles out of every ton, essentially, and it's good for the environment, right? I mean, lightweighting of packaging is great. That's what helps out on the shipping, transportation, all that stuff. But it does play a toll in the recycling world that we need to be cognizant of.
Okay, I know that somebody has the mic. Okay, whoever has the mic has the.
Hi, testing. My name is Sarah Schneider, and I'm with S&P Global Platts. There's a lot of talk about, education campaigns, but just because, it varies so much county by county, what do those education campaigns look like on the ground to the consumer?
So I'll take that one. We have a campaign, it's called Recycle Right. The thing that I stress is, you're exactly right, is each community could have a different acceptable items list, but we do know there's a lowest common denominator, right? We do know that every community takes cardboard, takes paper, takes glass, for the most part. Glass is one that's a little bit obvious, but bottles and cans, right? Those are welcome in any community, plastics, aluminum. So make sure that we focus on those first. And if you look at the recycling rate for those, even though the national average is 32%, for the most part, even the recycling rate for a bottle of water is only 30%. So we know that's accepted in all these programs. Can we just get that rate up? And so our education programs focus on just the core materials that's widely acceptable, making sure that everyone knows those belong in the bin, and then also helping to make sure that there's contamination is kept out in terms of hazardous materials like propane tanks, like batteries. Make sure those don't belong in the bin. But we have found, and there's no silver bullet for a good education program. We've had folks go door to door. We've had tagging of carts. We've had social media. We've had newspaper. We've not found one that, hey, this is the absolute right answer for it, but we've tried a lot of different mechanisms and continue to invest in education because that's where it belongs. My mom is one of the worst recyclers there is, and every time I go to her house, I'm like, Mom, you're my mom. This is my mom that's terrible at recycling, so I can imagine, in another industry what their parents are doing.
Yeah, the need for consistent messaging just continues. And sometimes we laugh that, this is job security for us because we're constantly having to educate people. Methods like community-based social marketing are really helping because that's really trying to change people's behavior and not just say, okay, this goes in this bin or this doesn't go in that bin, but trying to get people to change, their purchasing habits and their consumption habits. And that's the type of education I think that's really going to make a difference. You talk about your mom. So my 94-year-old mom called. I knew recycling was, a good career to be in. She called. She's like, so straws, are they really hurting the environment?
And your answer was?
Yes, Mom, don't use straws. What can I say?
So we do have a couple of questions up here. Oh, okay.
Hi, I'm Cynthia Vantall. I'm from Southern California. My company is Mariposa Eco Consulting. I'm the zero waste consultant for USC. And when we first started their zero waste plan, we went out and did a waste characterization. And of course, I always say, if it's not ooey gooey or chewy, put it in recycling. I mean, that's the fastest way I can do it. But I have to tell you folks, please remember this. I've been doing it for 23 years. There is so much stuff in that we were like, what the heck is this? All this single-use stuff that these USC students because they also have a Trader Joe's, a Target, and then of course their own stores on the campus. And we just had piles of like, what the heck is this? And again, if it's not ooey gooey and chewy, it's going to the hauler. So are you at WM doing do you have like a market research, like knowing new products that's coming out, and especially single use? Weird kombucha, weird, I don't know, every little weirdness that these students want, we're finding it, and I'm so lost after 23 years.
Yeah, it's always a challenge on that aspect of it. I will say that some of the weird stats that we have is the odd stuff that we get, and we started collecting the numbers on it. We get 30,000 pounds of batteries in every month, and we don't even collect. Batteries aren't accepted in any program. We get over 5,000 bowling balls a year. I've never seen one recycling program that accepts bowling balls, and I actually did the stats on this. There's only 2,300 bowling alleys in the United States, but yet we get 5,000 bowling balls a year. So I would love to trace back to the actual resident with one of those hidden camera shows and say, what were you thinking with this bowling ball in the bin, right? There's so much bizarre stuff that ends up in there. And again, that's where our education campaigns are. Just simplify what can be recycled, and let's get really good at recycling these items that we know have a strong demand for, because otherwise, you're right, you're going to end up with all sorts of odd stuff in the bin.
I'll mention this. I also did bowling ball recycling research because I was wondering why there was so much bowling ball. And I found out that the average bowler used to only have a single bowling ball, but now they have like about a dozen each. And there are like about 60 new bowling ball models introduced every year by the bowling ball manufacturers. So they're trying to increase turnover in bowling balls. So if you're a bowler, you might have had your bowling ball for years and years, but now it's like you always want the latest model.
Okay, so next year, next year on the panel, we're going to have Brunswick, our bowling ball manufacturer, next year on the panel. All right.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm sorry, we've got somebody back here, and we have a couple of speakers' questions up here after this person.
Thank you.
Mr. Flanagan.
This person.
That was my father, and I'm only Tim. Tim Flanagan from the Monterey Regional Waste Management District. I'd like to get the panelists to sort of weigh in, no pun intended, about where do you see reuse fit into the structure? Our facility is fortunate enough to run a reuse facility. We're just repurposing it with the Veterans Transition Center, which is a local group that supports veterans and veterans homeless issues, and have been in the industry a long time. We've made it work, and I just wonder, it may not be high up on the diversion in terms of weight diverted, but it certainly is higher up on the hierarchy. And I wanted to know, where do you see the opportunities for reuse being developed in facilities, integrated facilities like ourselves, transfer stations, landfills, et cetera?
I'm a huge proponent of reuse, and it's right under there, right under reduction. And we forget about those, nothing against my colleague here, but I always say to people, if we don't generate it in the first place, we don't have to pick it up and process it and market it and make it into new stuff. Reuse plays a really important part, not only in reducing the amount of waste that goes in the landfill, but also helping people that may be economically disadvantaged to be able to purchase things that they need. And so I love when that's integrated into a system like yours, and there's other examples of that, where you're going to the landfill, you've got this car, truck, whatever, vehicle full of stuff, but you can make a left turn and go to the reuse station before you go to the scale house and weigh it in for either even recycling or disposal. And again, with community-based social marketing, we're trying to teach people how to reduce the amount of materials that they use, but also to reuse them and to repurpose them. So I know, how does that figure into our national recycling calculation? I don't think, I think if we're going to count recycling, we should count recycling. I don't think reuse really fits into that calculation, and maybe that's more a part of diversion and waste reduction.
And I'll just comment on that as well. I agree with Michelle on the calculation. I think it's kind of hard or could be manipulated, but I do believe that reuse is very strong. And I think, just to set the standard is, yeah, we do have landfills. We're also the largest recycler, but our landfills have a limited time on them. Every one of them does. And if we fill those landfills today with items that can be reused or recycled, then that just shortens the life of that landfill and makes it an issue for us as well. And even, that's just not coming from me, but my boss, Jim Fish, is upstairs at the Investor Summit now. He'd say the exact same thing. Is landfills are a limited life asset, and when you have to build a new landfill in the city next time it comes, it's going to be way further away with a lot more transportation, a lot more expenses, and so those really should be conserved for just items that absolutely cannot be recycled or reused.
Yeah, and I'll touch on that too. I think, as far as the calculations are concerned, we heard EPA mention that they're going to come out with a methodology, and NWRA did comment on that, and one of the things we specifically said was we didn't think reuse should count as in the recycling numbers, that reuse works as reduction and it wouldn't end up in the denominator in the first place. And so since it's not in the denominator, it doesn't belong in the numerator. That being said, I think reduce ends up being more of a local thing, or reuse ends up being more of a local thing. My husband's got his growler, and we've got growler stations at every grocery store now. So, it's cut down on the number of beer bottles that we generate. So, but not on the beer he drinks, because sometimes he's got to finish that growler.
Yeah, I have two questions. First is, we want to get to, is it 50% by 2030, correct? First question is, what methodology are we going to use? Is it purely weight-based, or is it going to be volume-based, or a combination of the two? Obviously.
So if EPA continues with the previous methodology that they had used, it's purely weight-based. However, that was one of the things that they did ask for questions on. They had a bunch of questions that they solicited input, and that's one of the things that Nina Shah discussed on her presentation. I think she said they got 150 some comments back, and they asked a bunch of questions. But I don't know how we deviate from weight. People don't have ways to measure it, I think, in other ways, but let's hear what the experts have to say.
And then my second question is to each of you on the left. Where do you see the market going on plastic, paper, OCC, HDPE in the next 3 to 5 years? Where do you see the market and pricing?
Yeah, so I'll kind of take a stab at that one. So if for those of you that aren't familiar, natural high density, which is your clear milk jugs, for me it's iced tea, it is over $2,000 a ton. That has set a record pace. I was with one of our plastic folks, a few weeks ago. His phone rang 3 times, 3 different price changes. In the morning, it was it was at $1,900 a ton. By that afternoon, it went well above $2,000 a ton. And the other plastics are really following that in lockstep. Polypropylene, mixed color, PET's coming up. So it's hard for me to imagine how aluminum cans have fallen quickly to almost the number 3rd most valuable commodity that we collect in a curbside program, where they dominated. Aluminum cans have always been number 1 in terms of value per ton. Paper is actually coming back now too, as you all know. So we're seeing a lot of positive movements in that with the recent demand. So where do I see that going? I don't know if these prices can sustain this high for what they are on the plastic side specifically, but they are they're attractive enough that we should be able to start generating more supply. If we go back to the municipalities, they were struggling with recycling programs. We've started with education programs on basically we want your plastics, right? And working lockstep with those municipalities and those customers, saying, hey, this is the value of this stuff. It's really worth a lot of money now. It's going to help out your programs way more than it has in the past. And so if you look at plastics as an example, it's less than 5% of the stream. It's nearly 40% of the value in that bucket that the municipality gets paid off of. And so for them to help out and improve that recovery rate is going to be really important for their financials as well. So again, it's all about supply and demand. And right now we have a really strong demand for that kind of material.
Michelle, did you want to tackle that at all?
No, he knows way more numbers than I do, but I will address weight versus volume. So we do a lot of work out in the field where we go out and do waste characterization studies, and we, separate the incoming waste, and we weigh the, all the different materials, and we've done that for 40 years at our firm. We're doing a lot of those studies right now in relation to recycling and just weighing the recycling mix and measuring how much contamination is in that. And we grapple with that same question: is this the right way to do it? Putting it on a scale, and obviously the plastic doesn't weigh anything, and the glass weighs a lot more. I think that the important part is to have a consistent measurement system that we all use, that we're all measuring and counting the same thing. Because when we try to say, well, what's this state's recycling rate, and what's this state? Well, they include waste energy, or they don't include glass, or they don't include paper. So I think that the main thing is to have a consistent method. And since we all are pretty good at weighing stuff on scales, that's probably the best way to do it. I think that there's a use for volumetric measurements when you're doing lid flips, when you're looking in and you're trying to understand if there's contamination in that container that's got organics, or you're just trying to get an estimate of the types and quantities of materials that are in a bin. But I think for the time being, probably weight is, again, the most consistent method to use.
And I would just add on Brent's comments about commodities being up, natural HDPEs going up. Obviously we've seen so many of the commodities up. I think every single commodity is up right now. And we've had record numbers on some of the plastic bottles. And so that's great. But we did see that happen exactly when COVID hit. And it's been going up ever since. But it happened last March, and it's been going up ever since. So what happens when we get back to normal? I think that's anybody's guess. But on top of that, we've all been dealing with the year of shortages, and when things, there's any number of reasons that things could continue to go up. We've got new mills opening and things like that. But we do have prognosticators that are planning on being present for our commodities panel. So I'm going to give a plug for our Wednesday panels. We've got a whole session on plastic commodities, and then we have a whole session on the other containers, and fiber. So if you're really interested in knowing whether the experts say that they're going to sustain that upward projection, come to that session on Wednesday.
Bill Moore with Moore & Associates. I have a quick funny, since we all came from EPR and it's been on this panel. I guess the EPR fee on bowling balls would be pretty steep, wouldn't it?
I think, Bill, that's probably the best idea of this whole panel, is the bowling ball.
So just a quick observation, and then I do have a high-level question. We talked about lightweighting before, and we focused mostly on aluminum cans and bottles. Actually, I can see lightweighting in corrugated boxes starting to kick in, where the box growth rate is less than the container board growth rate. So that's something we were focused on in the past. So here's my question, and it's a difficult one. Since we're looking at this goal in 2030, what do you think the capacity utilization on residential processing and commercial processing is right now in the U.S. processing system? And Brent, you may know that for your own company, it may be big enough to extend, but also for SCS, if that's how many more MRFs are we going to have to build, or are we really underutilized? We kind of thought we were underutilized in processing.
Yeah, and I can take a stab at that. So most of our MRFs, we're probably around 60 to 65% capacity today. So we build them with plenty of room to add on, right? Second shifts, things of that nature. And there's clearly still some markets that are underserved that we'd like to be in and look for more opportunity. Those markets are going to need, to get to that 50% rate, additional infrastructure built up as well. One of the things, I guess, when we look at that 50% rate, we think, hey, the MRF, speaking on behalf of waste management, we'll get there to accommodate it, right? We're happy to invest there, but we also want to make sure the secondary markets are there for us. We can't build these MRFs and then have no place for our glass or for our plastics or whatever that may be. So I'm more concerned about the secondary markets being able to handle it than I am the recycling.
I think that there is a lot of MRF capacity out there. The important part is it in the right place? There's a lot of capacity on the West Coast and on the East Coast and parts of the Midwest, but it's not everywhere. And so doing work in the state of Washington, and they got to truck stuff a long ways from Eastern Washington to the West Side. And so that's, I think, where the need is how do we, like you said, how do we get those materials to the MRF processors, and then is there the offtake in that area as well for those materials? And of course, we've got to feed that beast, right? So you've got to have that material coming in to be able to build it and operate it cost effectively.
Yeah, and I appreciate what you're saying about the boxes becoming lighter. In fact, Steve Changaris just had received an Amazon box, and he took a picture of, I guess it said, same size but lighter containers. So I guess they're already advertising the fact that they're doing that. My only concern on stuff like that is, are they just using the same materials, or would they look at potentially reinforcing it with other materials? And I'd want to make sure that it remained 100% recyclable, so that it remained easily processed through our systems.
Hi, this is Sean McGinnis with Coefficient, with a Washington, D.C. based climate environment policy firm. My question is, well, an observation and then a question. We talked earlier about the role of minimum recycled content standards, and I think that the corporate commitments are very positive. We've seen those kind of fall to the wayside in the past. It is 2021. We got radical transparency, accountability to customers, accountability to investors, so I think that it will hold up. That being said, I don't think it's a reason for states to slow down with minimum content policies. And that's an observation. And an additional observation is, I look at minimum content standards as climate mitigation mechanisms. I think minimum content standards is climate policy. So we know the data around recycling and the role to mitigate climate. Is the industry doing a good enough job to weave that narrative into the climate policy debates that are taking place right now at the national level?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take a stab. Probably not. I think there's always a lot of more work to do, and information on the global changes, especially when you parlay that with the minimum content. So I think it's a good idea, and maybe Ann and Michelle have other opinions on that. But anything you can do, in my opinion, to support more minimum content, and that's just another great example that you've given, will help out the industry for recycling, so that we can continue to make sure we've got good, sustainable homes for our materials.
Yeah, like I said at the beginning, I think we're finally starting to connect those dots. And I think that the discussions have begun, and they're not going to go away. They're only going to get more robust.
Mike?
Yeah, Bob Hufford from General Kinematics Corporation. I just had a quick question, or maybe another observation and question, but obviously this is geared mainly around single stream materials, probably not as much as C&D or other MSW, other waste streams that are being picked up. And I'm assuming the recycling rate that the goal is to hit in 2030 is 50%. That's primarily just focused on single stream materials, not others.
Actually, the 50% by 2030, I believe, is the entire MSW stream. So yes, I don't think it can be achieved by single stream alone.
Okay, yeah, and that was an interesting point too. I think even on the C&D, I was bringing it up also on the C&D side, because our company does a lot of work on the C&D side. I mean, 4 very large waste management facilities down in southern Florida that are running 1,200 ton a day operations at 60-70% recycling rates. So, one way to, just an observation and a comment, one way to help bolster that recycling rate number is to get into waste streams that are having that high percentage rate, which helps grow your other total recycling rate of materials handled. Just a comment.
No, it's a great point, and you're right. Something to clarify: we do focus a lot of time on single stream, but the reality is that rate is the whole MSW stream, right? And so while C&D has a recycling rate that's very high already, we can improve that even more. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have organics, which has a very low recycling rate, and really has a lot of room for opportunities. So to hit that 50% number, yes, we have to improve the curbside single stream programs. You've got to compensate that with C&D, and you've got to really go after the organics, or else you're not going to get close to that number.
Right. I mean, I agree with Brent. I think a lot of this has to be an organics discussion. Food waste is the number one item in our MSW at this point. It's a low volume, high weight material, so it's without that we'll never achieve it unless we go towards the volume base that somebody suggested.
Well, and that also furthers the connection again of climate change. I mean, we've passed legislation in my state, in California, to reduce the disposal of organics to landfills 75%, which it's tied directly to our climate change goals in the state. And recognizing that we will never get to either of those, recycling or greenhouse gas emission reductions, if we don't get those organics out of the landfill.
I want to talk about downcycling versus circularity. And, we hear a lot of people talk about, like, we need the true sustainability, circularity, but very little plastic is circular. A lot of it ends up being downcycled. Can we live without downcycling? Is that going to stay?
So I've got a pretty strong opinion on this, and this is if you can replace virgin materials with any other form of recycling, then that's a win, right? You've made it so that that's one less natural resource we got to tap into, and we can use recycled material for it. So yes, we sell a lot of our bottles back into bottles. We sell a lot of them into carpet, into clothes, into other things, and because of that, it's able to keep and preserve virgin resources. And so that's our position on it. Would we love for everything to go back into a bottle? Yeah, maybe, but sometimes it's not the best use for the environment to go back into the exact bottle it came from. And so I think you've got to look at that whole cycle. There could be some things where downcycling is not great for the environment, and that should be looked at as well. But I think it depends on application, and a lot of curbside materials do get downcycled, and if it replaces virgin, then I think that's a win.
How can you disagree with that? I mean,
you can find a way.
No, I don't know if it's a one or the other. Downsizing, and I mean, isn't that part of circularity? We're going to use that material as much as possible until we can't use it anymore. I mean, circularity really looks at that whole journey of that material and its long-term use until we can't use it anymore. So I'm not sure if it's a one or the other, or it's really it's part of that system thinking.
Okay. I see no other questions, so I'll just keep going. Oh, we do have a question. So while the mic's going to you, I'll ask my next question. Lithium batteries. Scale
Yay or nay?
10.
Oh.
How bad a problem is this, and how much worse will it get?
Well, it's a very bad problem in MRFs. I have a good friend in Northern California who's, MRF had a severe fire and was closed down for half a year, and millions of dollars in damage. So, they're part of our world. We probably couldn't be doing any of this today without them. And so again, I think the education of what to do with those and not putting them in your recycling bin or your trash bin, I think that's at least the short-term answer to them. I'm not a scientist. I don't know if there's a alternative to lithium batteries, but in terms of getting them out of our waste stream and our recycling stream, that's the priority and where the education comes in.
Yeah, and I'll answer on the scale of 1 to 10. They're probably a 20. They're the worst things that can happen in a facility. If you guys have not seen videos, there's videos of forklifts simply running, not crushing, just simply running over batteries and causing explosions like you would never believe before. And in facilities that generate 70% plus paper, that is a recipe for disaster. I would say 90% of the MRF fires that you've seen on the news are caused by a battery when they do find the source of it. They're terrible. We've invested a lot of money in fire systems. There was a time period, and people don't realize this. You have every MRF has fires, right? The big ones are what you guys hear and see on the news. Unfortunately, there's one in Phoenix. It was a 6-alarm fire, the largest one in the city of Phoenix. Just happened a few weeks ago, and you could see it from space. It was that big. But we have fires every day in MRFs. There's a stat that we had. We run 100 facilities. There was a time period 2 years ago where, for 6 months we averaged 1 fire a day at a facility. Now, not all of them get called to the fire department, make the news, but fire training in our facilities is really a serious thing, and we can root them all basically back down to batteries.
Okay, on that cheerful note, somebody here at the back.
Hi, my name is Ashley Logan. I'm from a company called Yakety Yak, and we help businesses tell better stories. And I have a question about the single stream system. Is it hopeless? Are we trying to push a system that is going to continue to promote contamination? And I wonder what the thought process is about thinking outside the box to something different.
Yeah, so the one interesting thing on single stream recycling is a lot of folks, first of all, it is convenient, and unfortunately, in the United States, Americans need convenience or else they're not going to do it. And even as convenient as it is, we still have problems with participation rates. But the one thing that's interesting, if you look at the history of single stream, and people could have different history sessions, but mine really comes from, it wasn't that a bunch of recycling folks said, hey, you know what, we should just mix everything together, get in a MRF and unsort it all. It was because if you looked at the inefficiencies for the dual compaction recycling trucks that used to exist, you would go through a neighborhood, and if you remembered, half your truck was filled with fiber, the other half would be filled with the bottles and cans. One side would fill up, and they have to take that truck, break the route, and go to a recycling facility to unload essentially 70% or 60% of a truck. So a lot of our municipalities that run trucks, a lot of us that run trucks, our customers said, hey, for the trucking efficiencies, it's better to put it all in what looks like a trash truck. They can compact it all and put it all in there. MRF, you guys figure out how to unsort this stuff. And so the history that I experienced during the time that it was conversion to single stream was exactly that. Now, the benefits from recycling, we saw the rates go up 40% every time we implemented single stream recycling. It was great because everybody could put stuff in a big bin rather than their 18-gallon cart, which, if you guys have neighbors that still use that, the newspaper's flying, it's in the backyard by the time the recycling truck shows up. And then the little bottles and cans are scattered all over the street. So single stream recycling is just convenient for Americans, and there's really, in my mind, there's no turning back on it because so much of the infrastructure is built around that now.
Michelle.
And you look at me like I'm going to refute that. I agree. I mean, for a lot of reasons, and not only convenience, but getting more materials, getting more people involved, reducing worker risks, and in terms of having to manually, dump those boxes. So there's lots of reasons why that system works. But again, it's the education to get the right stuff in that bin and keep the wrong stuff out. And that's the real challenge. MRFs are doing a great job with increasing their technology to be able to sort the materials and create a cleaner stream. And so I think that's going to continue to play a role in our recycling and our single stream recycling as advances in technologies. And then working together again to create the markets, because we could collect it all day long, but if we don't have anything to do with it, then we're not recycling it, right?
And that's the one thing I will say that I regret as we rolled out single stream over the last 20 years is the education side of things. We should have done a much better job when we gave someone that 96-gallon cart to let them know what goes in that cart and the right items, because I think most education programs were an afterthought at best.
Yeah, and for years people would ask, and we'd say, just put it in the recycling cart, they'll take care of it. You know, and I think there's some companies that was their logo or their brand, and I'm guilty as well. Whether it was clients or family members, what do I do with it? Just put it in there; they'll take care of it. Well, we know that was the wrong message.
Mr. Tim.
Thanks. Maybe as a follow-up to that question, having run both a collection company and past life for waste management, I would suggest that the culprit behind the contamination in single-stream recycling, it is partly education, but I also believe it's metered can service. And we had over 200,000 single-family customers in Orange County. We provided the largest cart for one price across all spectrums, a 96-gallon trash, 96-gallon yard waste, and a 96-gallon recycling. Our contamination rate at the time of the program, which was in the late 90s, early 2000s, was less than 3%. We were shipping that material to Tony Fan at Potential Industries. And I would suggest, and maybe as a future panel, I believe it's the metered can service that forces people into the lower carts, that lends itself to the larger contamination in both the yard waste and the single stream recycling. And it doesn't cost a truck anymore to drive by in front and pick up a 35-gallon cart than it does a 96-gallon. And if we gave our customers the opportunity to put the things in the right cart, they would not end up contaminating the single stream or the yard waste. And so I would suggest that's a topic for future discussion, to eliminate the metered can service, give the residents the right size cart for their trash to begin with, and I would bet that you would have the contamination rates almost immediately. I had that experience running it myself, and I think it'd be a good topic for discussion. I don't think that motivates anybody to recycle anymore, whether or not you charge one rate for another. They will pick the lower rate, obviously, but I think we could make a panel about whether or not that metered can service really drives recycling rates, or as Brett said, it's a convenience to put it all in the recycling cart. So that's not really a question, that's an observation, but I think that might be an interesting panel to have next year.
Okay, we'll find the pay-as-you-throw proponents and throw them under the bus.
And Tim volunteered to be on that.
Yeah, it sounds like
looking forward to that.
Sounds like you're set. Yeah. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Tim.
Hi, Kerry Sanford with Resource Recycling Systems. I wanted to point out that there are still single-stream programs that are at 7% contamination. There are programs that are over 35%. Looking at what's different between those would be a huge lesson to all of us. One of the things I saw happen, especially around the economy crash 2007, 2008, a lot of municipalities discontinued their education programs and relied on the haulers all-in-one program and some of the other education mitigation programs that basically said just put it in the cart. And this is, I think we've all learned the hard way. It wasn't the way to go, but I'm looking for a way to back up a little bit on that part of it. And any comments on your own experiences relative to that and how we might get back there would be much appreciated.
Yeah, why is it that, the education program, the recycling specialists, they're the first one that gets laid off, right? When times are tough, and when in fact they are probably the most important, or one of the most important parts of that program to make sure the program continues. We've seen a huge resurgence in interest in education and outreach. I joked about it being, a long-term career for me, but I think people are acknowledging and beginning to really understand the importance of education and outreach, and for everyone. So, you know, we used to say, oh, we got to educate the kids. No, we have to educate everybody, because we're all, you know, consumers, and we're all generators of waste, and we have to have different messages for different people too, because, you know, people react to messages differently.
Yeah. Amen. There you go.
This is turning into a religious
You know, I'm going to add on just a slightly different twist on the education side, because, and when you said, you know, the first people to get laid off are the recycling folks, the first thing that happened during COVID is we started getting messages from our customers, our community, saying, we're going to suspend our recycling services because we're worried about the drivers picking up the trash. We're going to suspend recycling services because of this. It was the easiest thing to cut first. And we went back to them and said, okay, well, let me tell you this. The hospitals that are getting all your supplies are coming from cardboard boxes. The grocery stores that are running out of shelves come from packaging, cardboard boxes, the recycling industry. These customers, they don't use virgin material. There's a lot of paper mills now. They can only use recycled material. So if you don't provide them with these recycled materials they need to make their products and packaging on your shelves, the hospitals and the grocery stores aren't going to get the supplies they need. And it was a really awakening for them, because they just thought, oh, this is just a nice to have. And they quickly realized, oh, you're telling me that this is critical? This is a, you know, essential service? Yes, absolutely. And so we got letters from our customers saying, you know, essentially, if you don't provide us material, these shelves will not be stocked, and you'll have a bigger problem on your hands. So it was interesting, because even our community, our inbound customers, didn't realize how important recycling was.
Okay, well, we are out of time, so I'm sure we have a million other things to discuss. I only got through a couple of my questions. We never discussed labeling. We never discussed harmonized lists. There's so much more that we could talk about, but we have a whole bunch more sessions, and so hopefully we'll see you at a bunch of those. Please join me in thanking Brent and Michelle for